Good morning. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now we can hear you.
Hello. I'm trying to find out if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Let's see.
No, we can't. You're silenced now.
Okay. Thank you. I think the microphone was on, but the speakers were off. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. To those of you who were just arriving. Anybody been? Okay, everyone is in. No one is asking for authorization to get into the room. All right. So, morning. Welcome. This is a makeup class. We're supposed to have one presentation today, and the group who is presenting is the one who takes over the meeting. So anybody is giving a book report today?
Yes, Camila and I are.
Okay, so what should I do? Okay, varios participantes pueden compartir de forma simultánea. I think that's the one that I need to click.
Yes.
Yes, that's the one.
All right, try and good luck, ladies.
Thank you.
Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Okay, so good morning, everybody, professor, classmates. With Camila and I will be presenting today a short story called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by author Ambrose Bierce. Okay, as I said before, the author is called Ambrose Bierce, and he was born in Ohio, USA, the 24th of June of 1842. He was an American short story writer, a journalist, a poet, and a Civil War veteran. Also, as a little fun fact, he was the 10th of 13 children, and all his brother and sister's name started with an A. He served in the Union Army as a topographical officer, and he used to go scouting on missions to make maps and determine the enemy's position. He fought in the Battle of Shiloh and the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, where he suffered a head injury that temporarily took him out of action. He got unconscious in the battlefield. After the war, when he was traveling west with the military, he stopped at San Francisco and decided to resign his commission, and he became a journalist. When he became a journalist, he decided to work as a columnist for the San Francisco Examiner, and however, he spent several years engaged in fiction writing as well. That was one of his passions. Bierce was agnostic, and he strongly rejected the divinity of Christ. He was not that religious. He suffered from lifelong asthma, and he also had several complications that were due to his war wounds, and the most notably ones were his episodes of fainting and irritability. That those were assigned to the brain injury that he suffered at Kennesaw Mountain. He, in 1913, joined Pancho Villa's army in order to observe the army's effort in the Mexican Revolution. However, in late December of 1913, Pancho Villa's Pancho Villa's company disappeared along somewhere in the Chihuahua region, and along with Ambrose Bierce, and it was not heard of them ever again. So what happened to him, it's not quite clear.
Well, this short story was originally published by the San Francisco Examiner on 1890, and as you may notice, the experiences in the Civil War of Bierce were the basis of many of his stories, including this one. And well, this one is contextualized in the American Civil War, who took place between 1861 and 1865. So An Occurrence at Old Creek Bridge is a comment on the American Civil War, and the author here composed this short story as a way of describing both the political divides that caused the war and the realities that came with this fighting. And well, without slavery was what lay at the core of their dispute. So as you can see here in this image, on your left side, yes, there is the Union, also known as the North, and this was dedicated to the defeat and termination of the Confederate States of America, which is on your right side. And well, Confederate States of America was also known as the Confederacy or the South. And the Confederacy was originally formed by 7 secessionist slaveholding states, such as South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, in the lower south region of what we know as United States. And the economy of those states was strongly dependent upon agriculture and plantation systems that relied upon the labor of African American slaves. So the South decided to begin the war because they were scared that the abolitionists from the North would force them to free their slaves. So within this context of war is what this short story is taking place. Also, there is also the literary realism, which was part of the realist art movement. And well, realism challenges readers to look past myths, assumptions, social norms, and other expectations in order to see the world as it really is. So realist writers would depict daily life in gritty or sometimes unpleasant detail. And well, as you can see here in this painting, this is from the literary art movement, I mean, the realist art movement. And reality was portrayed as it really was, even though that was cruel.
Okay, next we have the summary of the plot. It's important to mention first that this short story is divided into 3 parts. The first part begins in northern Alabama during the Civil War. There is a man here about to be executed and 2 federal soldiers that are preparing him and standing on the Owl Creek railroad bridge. And the man soon to be executed is a civilian, and he is surrounded by more soldiers who are guarding the bridge. One of them is a sergeant, and he is on the end of a plank which sticks out over the bridge. And then, while the man awaits his execution on the other end of the bar with his hands tied behind his back and a rope around his neck, he looks down at the water below him. He closes his eyes and starts thinking about his wife and children and about ways that he could escape. However, he gets distracted by a loud clanking noise, which actually is the ticking of his watch. However, as he opens his eyes, the sergeant steps off of the plank and the hanging begins. When we move to part 2, it starts with a flashback, and the man's name is revealed as Peyton Farquhar, and he is introduced as a slave owner and supporter of the Confederate cause. An opportunity to help the cause arises when a soldier dressed in a Confederate uniform rides up to his house, and the soldier tells him that the Union troops are repairing railroads in the surrounding area nearby Owl Creek. And apparently the commandment had issued an order declaring that any civilian caught interfering with the railroad would be hanged. And then the soldier leaves after informing Farquhar that a pile of flammable driftwood has accumulated near the bridge. It turns out, however, that the soldier that was at his house was actually a Union scout. In modern words, he was a spy. Then in part 3, the story returns to the present as Farquhar falls from the bridge into the stream and seems to have lost all consciousness, but he comes to his senses and feels himself freeing his hands from their bindings and removing the noose around his neck. Realizing that the water keeps him safe from the soldiers' bullets, however, he swims away with the current until it eventually flings him onto the shore, and then he disappears into the woods. Then he's celebrating his escape, of course. Farquhar hurries home, and he travels all day and all night through a wild forest. He believes, at some point of the story, he believes that he must have fallen asleep because suddenly he found himself standing at the gate of his home, and he saw his wife. Therefore, he came to embrace her, but as he was about to grasp her, he felt a powerful blow against the back of his neck, and then a loud noise and a bright white light. And then I quote, "Then it's all darkness and silence." Well, we reach the spoiler alert warning. Farquhar at this point is dead, and his neck has been broken, and his body hangs between Owl Creek Bridge.
Well, the characters. The main character here is Peyton Farquhar. He is described as a handsome, wealthy Alabama gentleman with a well-fitting frock coat and a mustache and pointed beard, who is also a slave and plantation owner dedicated to the Confederate cause. We can infer that he's trying to sabotage an Union stockade at Owl Creek Bridge and then sentenced to death by hanging as a result. Then there is Peyton's wife. She is never actually given a name in the story, and she and their children with Peyton are conjured in Peyton's mind. She's pictured as beautiful and feminine, with a smile of ineffable joy and an attitude of matchless grace and dignity. And like her husband, she belongs to the Confederacy as well, and all her good manners still serve the institutions the Confederacy is trying to protect. Then there are the Union soldiers. These men are defined more as a group than by any individual, even if they are being led by a captain who commands the others. They include executioners, sentinels, and overseeing officers on the bridge, and a company of soldiers along the shore of Owl Creek. However, there are certain characteristics that are given to certain soldiers, such as the sniper who, according to Peyton, had gray eyes. And also the author emphasizes the soldiers' military discipline as they prepare to hang Farquhar. He describes them in silent terms. He said that the sentinels might have been statues to adorn the bridge, and that they move with emotionless efficiency. And then there is also the Federal Scout. As we found out at the end of part 2, this is a Federal Scout passing as an Union soldier who was also covered in dust.
Well, the setting of the story, it's in Owl Creek Bridge in northern Alabama during an undefined point in the American Civil War. Even if Beers never tells us the actual date of the occurrence, the narrator does tell us that the Confederate Army has recently suffered setbacks and the Corinth had fallen. And while we look at history, we learned that the Confederates pulled out of Corinth in late May of 1862. So even without the original date marker in the story, we can guess that the story takes place in 1862. In regards to the narrator, this is a third person limited omniscient. And the narrator's knowledge is limited to Farquhar, to only Farquhar. Therefore, we do not know much about the soldiers that are executing him. And by the end of the story, the narrator seems both reliable and unreliable, because he keeps crucial information, the crucial information of Farquhar's death, hidden from us, the readers, until the end of the story.
Mm-hmm. And well, in regards to structure and style of the writing, we can say that the writing of this story is descriptive, ambiguous, and poetic. And why we say it is poetic? Because here in this quote, Farquhar was in the river, had already fallen, and the narrator says, explains the situation in a poetic way, which you can read here in the quote. And also, this story is divided in 3 parts, and it has an irregular time sequence, and it also has a twist ending. So in this story, Beers abandons the common strict chronological narration. Actually, we remember that there is this concept in medias res, which means that the story starts in the middle of the narrative. So here in this story, the story starts with the protagonist already in the process of being hanged. And so then the background of the story is told in a flashback. And this flashback happens when the story goes back to the past when it changes the main character, Peyton, and tell us how he ended up in the situation of being executed by the Union Army. And then we also came across with this concept. Maybe you have heard it, maybe not. It's called a stream of consciousness. This is a narrative device that describes happenings in the flow of thoughts in the minds of the characters. So another appropriate term for this device is interior monologue, where the individual thought processes of a character associated to his or her actions are portrayed in the form of a monologue that addresses the character itself. Therefore, it is different from the dramatic monologue that we knew last semester, maybe, where the speaker addresses the audience on the third person. So this stream of consciousness aims to express in words the flow of characters' thoughts and feelings in their minds. So here, this technique, aspires to give readers the impression of being inside the minds of the characters. Ambrose Bierce also used a lot of literary devices, such as imagery. His story relies strongly on images focused on sight and sound to bring his story alive. For instance, here in this example, he tells the readers and allows the readers to imagine how the water looked like. And also we want to emphasize and highlight the way that this author used imagery, because he used it to great effect. Perhaps this example is the best one, because when Peyton plunges into the river, frees himself from his restraints and regains his senses, we readers get to experience his sensations with him. We get to feel and hear the experience of freedom. And the author's vivid language is so descriptive that we become kind of part of the scene and identify, or get to maybe get to sort of identify with Peyton's point of view. And there is also simile. We chose those two, and here these similes give the story a more dark and suspenseful side with words such as thrust of a knife and roaring water. They are dangerous phrases. So on the left side, we have that when Peyton was escaping from the soldiers, he heard the bullets going and passing alongside him. So then we have the water roaring in his ear like the voice of Niagara. So that is one way that the author allows us readers to kind of imagine how the situation was, how much excitement there was in the narrative. So, and also here we have personification, which is the same code that we have before. Here there is personification in the water rower. We are given the action of roar to water.
The other figures of speech that we found is metaphor, and we discovered them in these two sentences. Death is a dignitary who, when he comes announced, is to be received with formal manifestations of respect, even by those most familiar with him. And the other one is, his brain was as energetic as his arms and legs. He thought with the rapidity of lightning. These two parts give more details on how Peyton was feeling and what he was going through at the time before his execution. And it also shows the view that the main character had on death. The other ones are allusion, and here we found two. The first one is, and the wind made in their branches the music of Aeolian harps. Well, Aeolian harps is the allusion because it is named after Aeolus, the Greek god of wind. And an Aeolian harp doesn't require human hands to make noise. Only the wind hits the strings and it causes them to make a sound. And the other one that we found is Mrs. Farquhar was only too happy to serve him with her own white hands. This is an allusion to slavery. And Mrs. Farquhar fetches the water for a thirsty soldier in a Confederate suit. And apparently she thinks that serving the soldier herself, rather than calling upon a slave to perform the task, manifests that the depth of her support to the Confederacy. She is, of course, unaware that the soldier is a Union Scout in disguise. Then we found irony, and this irony, we divided it in three types of irony. The first one is situational irony, which is when the opposite of what is expected to happen happens. We can see it when Peyton gets hung. The reader expects him to simply die, but the rope snaps and he falls into the river. The other one is dramatic irony, and it is when the reader knows something that the characters don't. And it is exposed when the Federal Scout comes to Peyton's house and the author allows the readers to know that he is a Federal Scout, but Peyton does not know that. And the last one is verbal irony. And we find it when the Federal Scout comes to Peyton's house and tells him to come to the bridge to burn it down. But he also really means to come to the bridge to get hung. And verbal irony is also known as sarcasm, which is when the opposite of what is meant to be said is said.
Mm-hmm. Then in point of view, we have that this is given from third person omniscient through the stream of consciousness structure, which focuses on Farquhar's perceptions. And this limited point of view focuses attention on the inner workings of Farquhar's mind as he faces his death. The narrator knows the entire time that Peyton is dreaming, but the narrator tricks us readers into thinking that Peyton has escaped. And by representing the scenes of Peyton's dream as reality, the narrator toys with our emotions as readers. And well, in this story, in part one, there is objective third person of view, which give us or allow us to observe the events, but we cannot enter into the minds of any character. But then in the last paragraphs, the narration shifts to omniscient third person of point of view, but in relation to Peyton Farquhar. This shift allows the author to take the reader as inside Farquhar's mind to demonstrate how emotional disturbance affects not only the way the mind interprets reality, but also how it perceives the passing of time. So talking about time, we have then the themes. The first one is time. And just like in real life, time is very fluid in this story. At certain points, time races, but at others it crawls at a snail's pace. And so an occurrence at Old Creek Bridge seems to ask us how we experience time. It seems to depend completely on what a person is going through, because by going against a military order, Farquhar becomes subject to military time. And though his imagination allows him to temporarily escape the highly a strict time set by the soldiers, his body never breaks free. So time loses all meaning as Peyton approaches death.
Sorry, I had my mic off. Then we have life and death. The theme of death is related to time and reality in this story because the experience of the separation between life and death is subjective for Farquhar. It could also be an examination of the line between life and death and how the latter can heighten and enhance the former. Death too is examined as a part of the human condition. The author here uses his protagonist's surreal journey through the woods as a way of inferring that other planes of reality may exist, maybe that there are other worlds beyond that of human beings, and that death may be the getaway to them. Though the author doesn't speculate extensively on that front, death remains as mysterious as ever, and his prose does invite serious contemplation as to what might happen after human beings pass on. With Camila, we're discussing that maybe this it is maybe a way of talking about purgatory, which is really present in some writings of related to death. We also have reality or illusion. And in certain ways, this story is about interpretation and Farquhar's understanding of the world around him, and the reader's perception of what happens to Farquhar are related. Farquhar's version of reality becomes more problematic and less believable as the story passes. And Beers may be inspiring us to question what in our lives is real and what is not. If a man is at death, if a man that is at death's door can imagine and experience such a realistic escape, it's important to ask ourselves, what can the human brain imagine? And reality and illusion operate side by side, and until the end of the story, we are not aware of any division between them. I mean, Farquhar's illusion is reality for us, the readers. And as far as we know, it's also the reality of our main character. Farquhar creates his fantasy world out of desperation. He tries to distinguish one from the other. He tries to distinguish one from the other. This seems to suggest that humanity's experience of reality is maybe merely a construct of the mind, and people can always trust what we see or what feels real. I mean, who is to say what reality is? Maybe we are just in the matrix and nothing is real. So it's something that we have to question.
Yeah, well, in order to ask question this type of questions, there are also symbolisms here in this short story. The first one is the ticking watch. At a certain point in the story, right before Peyton falls off the bridge, he hears the ticking of a clock, which heightens his anxiety and draws out the moments before his death. And well, we think that watches are often strong symbols of time in literature. And since Peyton was about to die, the ticking seems to emphasize how little time he has left. And also there is Farquhar's family. We think that in one sense, his family could represent hope, because this appears most prominently at the end of the story when Farquhar believes he has returned to find his wife. The power of that emotion is enough to pull him through his surrealistic escape, and even that journey proves to be just a dream. And maybe it is a hope that Farquhar finds worth holding on to till the last moment of his life.
Yes, I wanted to ask the professor a question. It says that we have 4 minutes, well, now 3 minutes left. Shall we continue until it stops, or shall we start over, I mean, a new meeting?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's going to cut us off at any moment. Maybe we should just keep until it cuts us off. Yeah, okay. The tone of this story is sardonic, which basically means bitter or cynical. And the story itself is quite dark, and the author uses great detail in describing how Farquhar was executed. He describes very well when he says that his neck, the main character's neck turns black, that his eyes get congested, and that his tongue swellens. These kind of descriptions were so well detailed that the story itself it makes the story itself maybe not have like such a pleasant plot. And we're almost finishing. So then we have the fun fact. Well, we with Camila took the liberty again to add some fun facts about the story. This literary work was quite famous back then, and French filmmaker Robert Enrico adapted the story into a short film. And this won both Best Short Subject Award at the 1962 Cannes Film Festival, and it also won Best Live Action Short Film in the 1963 Academy Awards. It was so good, this short film, it was so good that the producers of The Twilight Zone bought the rights and aired it as an episode of the famous show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there were more and more adaptations of An Occurrence at Oak Creek Bridge. And some of them, this one, Baby Bird by Unlovable by Baby Bird, was the one that with Diana selected for telling the summary of the plot. And then there is also a video of group love called Colors that also portrays the story of this story. And also a newest adaptation of this story or similar plot. We can see it in Black Mirror episode 2 from season 3 called Playtest. This episode involves a similar plot point in its story. So, well, there are more adaptations, but we only took a few.
Yes, and with Camila, found this quote that pretty much sums up what we were discussing after we read the story. And it says that the author, Beers, reminds us that although the distance between death and life can seem vast, the Grim Reaper is often just around the corner.